love I fought to feel was always free? What if all the things I've done, were just attempts at earning love, 'cause the hole inside my heart is stupid deep. Oh, stupid deep. Tried to go was always here, and the path I tried to cut was always clear. Why has life become a plan, to put some money in my hand, when the love I really need is stupid cheap? Oh, stupid cheap. Just attempts at earning love, 'cause the whole inside my heart is stupid deep. Just attempts at earning love, 'cause the hole inside my heart is stupid deep. Oh, stupid deep.
Mark Twain once wrote that the two most important days in your life are the day that you were born and then the day that you find out why. And if I could build on that, I might suggest that a third very important day in your life is the day that you begin to wonder why before you know why. Because so many of us are born and then we live our childhood without ever questioning that incredible fact is true and why it is true. Some of the more curious of us, maybe in our teenage years, begin to ask why, or maybe when we go to college and have freedom for the first time, maybe when we face some real adversity or one of life's real setbacks for the first time. Some of us keep our head down and we stay busy enough that we get far enough in life and never really ask the question until we have an experience that, thanks to Elliot Jock, we have a name for because he is the man that coined the term midlife crisis. And you know what this is, but a definition of it I think is really helpful for where we're going today, because a midlife crisis is a transition of identity, which is going to be a very important word for our conversation. A transition of identity and self-confidence. The phenomenon is described as a psychological crisis brought about by events that highlight a person's growing age, inevitable mortality, we're getting older, and we're all going to die, and possible shortcomings of accomplishments in life. This may produce feelings of depression, remorse, and anxiety. What's really interesting, though, is that the research would say we don't all actually experience this crisis. There's things that you can do on this side of it to prevent it. And we don't all experience it midlife. My favorite band just came out with a new album on Friday, and the second song on it is called Quarter Life Crisis, about experiencing this in your 20s. See, this is a really interesting part of the message, because normally what I would do here is I would introduce myself to you guys, because I'm not the regular communicator, I'm not the lead pastor here, but I actually want to flip the script today, and I would like it if you guys introduced yourselves to each other and then to me. So what I'd like to do before you panic too much is, if you could, just to somebody around you, maybe it's the person you came with, maybe you make a new friend, maybe you even get a date out of it, and you can thank me later for that. But just kind of tell them, as if you're meeting them for the first time, who you are. A couple words to describe you. I'm a mom, I'm a teacher, whatever that might be. I'll give you a minute or so to do that. If you really are, if you're in here and you really don't like humans, I don't blame you, I understand. You can just get your phone out and write a couple things down. But I'll give you guys a minute to do that. Answer this question, who are you? And then I'll keep our conversation going. All right, I hate to interrupt any new friendships being made here. Y'all can stop talking in church now. Just to get our conversation started, one of the ways that I might introduce myself to you guys, I would probably say that I'm a UT grad, which, thinking of that word identity, most of us Longhorns, our identity is in 2006. So a big part of me is stuck there, is where my identity is. I would probably introduce myself as a dog father, because my wife Emily and I, we're kind of weirdly obsessed with our dog Mowgli, and we know this, we own it makes people uncomfortable. But we had a long weekend. We had a very difficult weekend for us because Mowgli just got his second haircut. And Friday morning in the parking lot, this was the before picture, and he's got the mane, and he looks like a lion and all these things. I think this might have been the lady's second haircut she's ever given, because this was the post haircut picture. His eyes are literally like I trusted you guys. That's what it sounds like. Emily went home and worked on his ears and stuff. But anyways, we're still mourning the loss of what was. I'd probably introduce myself as a husband, not necessarily in this order, just to clarify in terms of importance, but one of the things I'll throw out there. But for you guys, just go ahead and shout a couple out for me, just so I'm not up here, standing awkwardly. What were some of the things you introduced yourself as? What are some of the things you do, maybe?
The love of his life.
Wow, love of his life. I love that. Love of his life. That's good, okay? What else? What else made the list? What was that? Leader. I like that a lot. Leader. Let's see. Maybe one more or so. I'm an Aggie. I'll do it for you, Herb. I'll do it for you. All right, there it is. Equal representation. Maybe we got some parents in here. I'll do parents. and maybe of the grand variety as well. Throw that on there. And I want to close with this one. I'm going to write E/V/C because I just want all of our entrepreneurs, vegans, and CrossFitters to make it on there. We already probably knew you were, but just to cover that shout out as well. So here's the potential list. I'm sure we had a lot more in the crowd. Part of the reason that this is entertaining for me, or that this is an interesting exercise for me personally, is because I had the privilege of starting to communicate here at North Point when I was in high school. We were much smaller. People were really nice, very forgiving. But I started communicating in our student environments, and I would introduce myself basically the same way every single time. And I would say, I'm a student at Vista Ridge. I would say I'm a varsity baseball player with emphasis on the varsity because I thought that made me sound cooler. I didn't bring up the fact that I only had 4 at-bats my whole senior year and I went 0 for 4, didn't feel necessary. But I would say that. I would say I was a student leader here, things like that. And then I graduated. And the day I graduated, all of these things I used to describe myself didn't matter anymore. Your GPA was irrelevant, all these things you think are important. Then the next time I communicated, I was like, who am I? There's this identity crisis, and was I even fairly representing myself before? And it was one of the first times I started to ask this question, and then certainly other life events on top of that. But as you can see from our list, and maybe how you introduced yourself and how I typically will from stage, typically, especially in our culture, what we do defines who we are. Even when you're asked as a young kid, what is it that you want to be when you grow up? Usually that answer to that question, what do you want to be? You respond with something you want to do. I want to be a firefighter when I grow up. I want to be a garbage man because, riding around the neighborhood, that sounds like an adventure when you're 3 years old. That sounds incredible. But you say something you want to be or do instead of what you really want to be. I heard Andy Stanley talk about it this way once, kind of illustrated this way. He's a pastor of a large church in Atlanta. And he said, you could kind of simplify your life into these 3 categories. And granted, it's certainly, he said, an oversimplification. But he said the third bucket, the third chair, the third category is what you do with your life or what you want to do with your life. He said the second category is who you want to be with, who you want to spend your life with, who you want around you. And the first category is who you want to be. And he said, unfortunately, almost all of us, pretty much 100% of the time, we skip to buckets 2 and 3. We go to what we want to do and who we want to be with without ever figuring out who it is that we want to be. And a lot of us never even go to chair 1. A lot of us never even answer it. But he said the reason that this is a huge mistake every single time is because who we are ultimately influences the health and happiness of our relationships, and it impacts and influences what it is that we want to do. And you may be talented enough, you may have enough skills, enough education, enough resources to get down the road a little bit on these 2. And there's enough pressure in culture to focus on these 2. Are you going to be single forever? Are you going to get married someday? Are you going to have kids someday? There's a lot of pressure of what are you going to do and how much money you're going to make and all of these things. But nobody holds you accountable to who you are going to be. And the danger in that is if we don't know who we are, we cannot sustain who we're going to be with and what it is that we're going to do. In fact, a lot of the times, it's an implosion in one of these 2 categories that causes us to pause and ask, who am I really? There's a lot of potential answers to that question. Some of them we might not say if I were to ask you, but in reality, if we were to use the word that we saw up front on that midlife crisis definition, if we were to think about our identity, there's several categories that we could go to talk about. Maybe our identity very simply is in a physical category. Maybe it's just how we look, how we present ourselves, how pretty we are, how attractive we are, how skinny, how fit, how strong. Maybe it's the lack of one of these categories. Maybe for a long time, you've just always thought, I'm the ugly one. Maybe it's an attribute. Maybe in middle school, you were the class clown, and the way you got friends, the way you got acceptance is you were funny. And so now you've always been the funny guy. You're the smart one. You're the smart one of your friend group. Or maybe it's the opposite. It's the lack thereof. You are the boring one. You are the dumb one, and that's how you see yourself. Maybe it's a status thing. It's a position. It's a job title. Maybe it's a success thing. What house I have, what car I drive, where I live. Maybe it's relationships. I'm not saying these are all bad. Maybe it's, I'm a husband, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a father. The way you could summarize, we could add so many more things to this, but the way you could summarize almost anything that we would throw up on the board is with one word, and that is performance. Even with the ones that seem good, even like, no, a mom is a good thing. Yeah, but so often it's, am I a good enough mom? So often is, what kind of husband am I? Even in those things, our performance gets wrapped up in there. See, but there's some major problems with finding our identity in performance. And you guys probably already know this, but think about a couple of these things. When my identity is based on my performance, I can never be enough. There will always be somebody smarter, somebody funnier, somebody richer, somebody better looking, somebody who seems like a better parent. And it's never been easier to find those people than in the world we live in today with social media. We can always find somebody better. Not only that, not only is it that we can't be enough, but neither can anyone else. Meaning the only moments that you are happy are when you are looking down upon somebody else at what they don't have or what they have not yet accomplished. Become very arrogant and judgmental. So it's a lose-lose in either of these scenarios. Not only is that true, but you know this also, when an identity based on performance is both conditional and extremely fragile. You are one life change, one circumstance away, one phone call, one moment away from your whole core identity changing and shifting in any given moment. I mean, think about this. Any of these could cause, it could be a move. It could be a job change, whether you chose it and wanted that job change or not. It could be a loss of a relationship. In the most extreme, it could be a death. It could be a divorce. It could be a financial crisis, an injury to your athletic career, your professional career that you thought was going to be. It might be a birthday. You may be celebrating the 9th anniversary of your 29th birthday because you refuse to think about, where am I supposed to be at 30, at 40, at 50, at 60? And something about that day causes us to think, am I where I'm supposed to be? Am I who I am supposed to be? But for you, how would you answer the question of who are you? And what even are our real options? Does it even make sense that my identity could be in this list of performance things? Thinking about your wedding day, I mean, does it even make sense that 15 minutes before I said my vows, I was a whole different person at my core than I am now that I've said my vows? Did my whole identity change? Or are we placing our identity in all of the wrong places? I want to look at a potential option that we could all consider, however it is that you came to be in the room today. And this option is presented to us by one of the New Testament authors. We're going to look at some of the writings of Paul today. And he's very transparent about where he found his identity in the past and the switch that he decided to make. And as I read Paul's writings, I can't help but think, I don't know how many of you are into or know your Enneagram number. Anybody know what number you are by chance? A couple of you in the room. I'm kind of into it. It's like a personality profile test. You're given a number 1 through 9, and if you don't like those, that's probably because you're one of the numbers or something like that. But Paul, I have a theory that he would be a 3. Sometimes people try and guess historical people. I don't know how that works, but he would be a 3, and the 3 is the achiever. Okay, it's the ambitious one. 3s are very image conscious and care about what we look like and those things. So I think Paul would be this because he was extremely ambitious. He achieved a lot. And there are 2 different letters where he does this like humble brag kind of list. He lists these things. He's like, I don't want to have to say all these things I've done, but you've made me do it. And so here's all these things that I've accomplished, all these things that I've been through. And I want to look at those lists for a second because you see where he found his identity. In Philippians, he writes this in chapter 3. He said, though I could have confidence in my own effort, if anyone could. Indeed, if others have reason for confidence in their own efforts, I have even more. If anybody can find their identity in performance, I'm the guy. And then he says, let me tell you why. I want to switch to 2 Corinthians. That's where the other list is found. In 2 Corinthians, he lists it this way. He says, whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I'm speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. I was born in the right place at the right time to the right people group. And then he says, are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this. There's his kind of humble brag statement. I am more. I have worked much harder, been imprisoned more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. So he goes on this list and he says, I've done all these things, been through all these things, and accomplished all these things. But here is my conclusion as I reflect on all that. Looking at the end of the other list back in Philippians, he says, I once thought that these things were valuable. In fact, they defined me. That's who I was. But now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Which now we have to ask, what has Christ done? Because Paul didn't stop being ambitious. He didn't stop working extremely hard after Jesus. So what is it that Christ has done? What Christ has done is he came down and he showed us what perfect performance looks like. And he actually raised the bar and raised the standard to show us by just how far we have missed it. That we could never by our performance earn a right standing with God. So he died the death that we deserved. He rose 3 days later to prove that he is who he claimed to be. But he didn't just do that for the sake of heaven. This whole Christianity thing is not just about Hawaii 2.0 someday. It's about something so much more than that. It's about something now, here in this life. He gave us something brand new so that we could be brand new. And Paul talks about this constantly. He actually has a phrase for this new identity that Jesus offers us. But I want to look at Galatians, the example in Galatians where he talks about this new identity that Jesus offers us. He says, the law was our guardian until Christ came. It protected us until we could be made right with God through, not our performance, but faith. And he says, and now the way of faith has come. We no longer need the law as our guardian. In other words, to an extent, it makes sense that it's in us because at one time we needed the law. At one time, the best we could do was perform and be the best we could possibly be to try to be righteous in God's eyes. At one time, that makes sense because Christ had not come yet. So it had its time and its purpose. And it makes sense to a degree that you are wired that way and have that in common with your ancestors. But hey, no more. It served its purpose. That is not how you earn this right standing with God anymore. In fact, let me suggest who you are now because of what Christ has done. He gives us an identity statement, an option for every single one of us. And he says, for you are all children of God through faith in Christ Jesus. What's interesting about this statement is if you've grown up in church long enough, that kind of an idea may fall on deaf ears because you've heard that so many times. If you're new to church, that might sound like a weird statement. But what's phenomenal about that is he's saying there is a creator. There is an intelligent designer behind this universe. There is a being that is more majestic and creative and awe-inspiring than we could ever comprehend. And he desires a very personal relationship with every single one of us. He has intervened in human history through what Christ has done for us. And the best way we can understand how we relate to him is he says, he looks at you and says, you are my son, you are my daughter. You are a child of the creator of the universe. And yet we spend our days stressing on how well we're doing with these things in our performance. He says that should change everything about how we see ourselves and how we see the world. He even talks about what that looks like. He says, and all who have been united with Christ in baptism have put on Christ, like putting on new clothes, this new identity. There is no longer Jew or Gentile. We don't even need to describe ourselves this way. Slave or free, male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. I want to give you a definition of what could be our possible identity in one statement. And it's from one of my favorite authors. It's a writer who has influenced my understanding of my own identity so much, especially in the past few years, as I've tried to discover and figure this out for myself. And this writer's name is Brennan Manning. And I want to give you the definition that he offers. But before I jump right to it, I just want to give you a little bit of a window into who this guy is. Because I just feel like when you read his words, he understands God and his love for us in a different way than most do. Brennan has an extraordinary story. He was born during the Great Depression in New York. Then he fought for our country as a Marine. He came back and he had a long battle with alcoholism. And then he travels the world trying to discover himself. Spends time in France, and he literally deliver food and water to homeless people riding around on donkeys. And then he spends 6 months in a cave in a desert, spends time in the wilderness, comes back, does seminary, becomes a pastor. And then writes a series of books that have just been incredibly influential for so many. One of those is called The Ragamuffin Gospel. If you've ever heard of that, it's a best-selling book. But he's written so many, and his words are extraordinary. They jump off the page. And I want to read you a transcript from not one of his books, but actually one of his sermons. And it's a little bit of a window. You can find it online. You can watch it. But one of his sermons, and it gives a window into who he is and his story even a little bit further. But here's the story I want to read. It starts off this way. And this is him talking in the midst of one of his sermons. He says, "This moment, do you really believe that Jesus Christ loves you? Not the person next to you, not Mother Teresa, not Billy Graham, not the church, not the world, but that he loves you beyond worthiness and unworthiness, beyond fidelity and infidelity. That he loves you in the morning sun and in the evening rain, without caution, regret, boundary, limit, breaking point, no matter what's gone down. He can't stop loving you. This is the Jesus of the Gospels, the Jesus of my own journey. This is not something I read in a book or heard in a sermon. This is the Christ that by the grace of God I met in my own life." It was about 24 years ago, April Fool's Day, 1975. I woke up in a doorway on Commercial Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I woke up in an alcoholic fog, sniffing vomit all over my sweater, staring down at my bare feet. I didn't know who had stolen my shoes during the night. I'd been on the streets for 3 weeks, sleeping on the beach until the cops caught me, sleeping under the bridge and doorways, and panhandling enough money to get a quart of vodka every day. Same filthy clothes, rancid body odor, and I lived to drink. That morning, I woke up, still in a fog. I see a woman coming down the sidewalk, maybe 25 years old, blonde hair, and she had her 4-year-old son in her hand. The boy broke loose from his mother's grip, ran over to the doorway, and stared down at me. His mother came up quickly behind him, cupped her hand over his eyes, and said, "Don't look at that filth. All that is pure filth." And about 24 years ago, that filth was Brennan Manning. And that God I've come to know, the Jesus I have met in my own life, loved me as much that morning in a state of disgrace as he does tonight in a state of grace. For his compassion is never, never, never based on our performance. Some of us like ourselves because of our performance and some of the things we've accomplished in life. Some of us, because of our lack of performance or our greatest mistakes, know exactly what it's like to feel like what Brendan Manning said, filth. And in both, neither are great spots to understand our position as a child of God. Because in one, we're okay. We don't really need God. In the other, we are not deserving of him. Brennan said, it's not about our performance. Then he offers us a potential definition for every single one of us. He says, what if? What if you define yourself radically as one beloved by God? This is the true self. Every other identity is illusion. What if that is true? What if that is true? What is the order supposed to be? What are we even saying is the real option here? Because so often in life, especially in church world, I think if you've grown up in church, there's like this list, this order that comes about. I don't totally know where it comes from. I've just felt it. Maybe you felt it before. But it seems like the order is supposed to go God, then our spouse, if you choose to get married, then kids, if you choose to be a parent, then what I do. In church world, maybe that's your calling, what purpose, what value you're going to bring to the world. So often, the practical way that works out, the way we actually live, is quite literally the reverse. The time that we allot most is to what we do, then to being a parent, and especially in our culture, in our world, kids take precedent above all. Then if there's time left over for my spouse, great. And then Christmas and Easter will do for God. That's usually how the order goes. But I would like to suggest that neither of those lists are correct. Because I think what Paul is suggesting, and I think what Brendan Manning is suggesting, is that the order actually goes like this. Loved by God, and nothing else. That's it. Nothing else makes the list. Which I would imagine if you're new to church or exploring all this, or if you've grown up in church, that might be tension-filled, that might be a confusing statement. You might say, is that even livable? I mean, is that even realistic? Like, what am I supposed to say? Like, somebody says, you're a great father. And you're like, no, I'm not. Well, are these your kids? Well, depends, I guess. I'm not sure. I mean, we have these words that describe what we do that are important. I'm not saying that. But when you define yourself radically as one loved by God, it changes everything. Because when you define yourself as loved by God, and this is your identity, here are some of the things that are true of you. You are now accepted. God sees you as strong. He says you have purpose. He says you have more value than I could possibly articulate. He says you are forgiven. You are enough. And when we operate from this place, from this center, from this core, it changes everything about the way that we do this list. When you operate from a place of acceptance, you have been accepted, rather than trying to be accepted by what you do over here. It changes everything. When you operate from a place knowing you have purpose, knowing what your purpose is, and intentionally investing your time in what is purposeful, it makes you a different kind of spouse, a different kind of parent, a different kind of professional. But here's the secret. Please do not miss this. If you give in, you concede, and you're like, okay, I get it, that makes sense. You got to place this number one, because that's the way all of these get better. Meaning if you put the results ahead of the relationship, you get neither. You have to pursue this for nothing else but the sake of this. Because it is the only way that you can understand that you are accepted just because you have breath in your lungs and not because of what you've done on this list. You are enough because when God looks at you, he sees his son, he sees his daughter, not because of what you have or have not done on this list. That is the only way that you can operate from true acceptance, true forgiveness, true love, true value, true purpose, is if you know I am defined by this and nothing else. And yes, ideally, these become better than you ever could have imagined. But if you pursue the results first and not the relationship, you get neither. So is this livable? Is this practical? Can you actually do something with this? I think it may, in fact, be the only way to be truly alive. You know what makes adulting hard? We're in part 2 this week of Adulting is Hard. Last week, Buck talked about the emotional age gap, which really has to do with not knowing ourselves. And this week, we're continuing it to say, who am I? You know what makes adulting hard? It's not the crazy busyness of life. Those things may be, funny sometimes to make memes about, but most of those things kind of end up working themselves out. Most people kind of get it over time. You grow up, you got to get an oil change. They give you a sticker on your car. As long as you're within 2, 3, 5, 10,000 miles of that, you're pretty much good to go. If you don't pay your taxes, there's a whole organization that will not only remind you, they'll show up at your door to help you with that. So there are things that kind of work themselves out. What makes adulting hard is when you fail at something. We've all failed at something, but come on, some of us have failed big. Some of us have failed repeatedly. And we don't need to glorify this. We haven't just all failed forward. Like we took a good risk and we failed. Some of us have failed backwards. We failed in an area of our life that we had no business messing around with in the first place. And then so often we are defined by whether that failure took 5 minutes or 5 weeks or 5 years, we're defined by that great failure. And there's a pit in our stomach when we think about it. And we can't imagine seeing a different kind of future, having hope for a different kind of future, because we feel so undeserving of that now. I think personally, just to be real with you, I think personally, part of the reason that I have been afraid of failure my whole life is the way I perceive it, the way I think about it, is when I fail, everybody gets a glimpse into the real me. The rest of the time, I'm just kind of covering it up. I'm putting this makeup on it, everything that maybe looks good. But man, when I failed, there he is. That's who Jordan really is. That's why failure is so terrifying. What if it is quite literally the opposite? What if when you've placed your trust in Christ? What if this is the real you, the only true self, and any kind of failure is just a deviation now of your true self? You tap back into the way things used to be. You tap back into the old way, but that's not who you are. Regardless of what anybody else says, what God says on this is most important, and he has spoken. Maybe that's the reason you showed up this morning, is just to know you are no longer defined by your greatest mistake. You know what makes adulting hard? When you're criticized, especially by people that you care about. Now, maybe you've had a work day, a work week, a career ruined by an employee, by the boss that criticized you. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's your spouse. There's a conversation you can't have with your spouse because you know if you bring it up, they will shut down. You feel like you can't be real as a result. Maybe there's a conversation that you shut down whenever it's brought up. Because when we find our identity in our performance, in our jobs, in our roles, in our role as husband and wife or as a parent, and you criticize that, it shakes us to our core. But what if it could be different than that? Emily and I, we've been in a relationship about 10 years now, and for the first 7 or 8 of those years, I was defensive 100% of the time that she would bring up anything I didn't like or give me any kind of feedback or reflect anything to me. And I'm the worst kind of defensive too. I don't even like yell and get angry and then it's like, oh, he's just on the crazy train. I'll manipulate it. I'll twist it back on her to make her feel bad for ever bringing it up in the first place. It's terrible. Past couple of years, because of some great mentors, some great friends, counseling, we made a little progress. After this week, I said, how often do you think I get defensive now when you bring up a hard conversation? She said 25% of the time, which I felt like that was a pretty good improvement. I would have guessed more than 50%. But I was thinking about this, and literally 2 weeks ago, we do this thing, we call it a weekly meeting because we meet weekly. And so we call it that. And we talk about some of the very boring, mundane things of life, our schedule and budget and different things, and we kind of check in on each other. And she brought up this thing when we were checking in on each other. And she said, hey, I wanted to tell you this. I wanted to bring something up because I was talking about it in counseling, and I've been thinking about it a lot. My counselor said I should just bring it up to you that I've been feeling this way. I was like, this is going to be awesome. Give me the popcorn. That's what I was born for. So she says, I'm not saying I'm even right or wrong or that you're right or wrong or anything. This is just a feeling I've been having. And so I wanted to share it with you rather than harboring resentment and it builds up and then we're fighting about the dishes later and it had nothing to do with the dishes. I just want to tell you I've been thinking this thing. And Emily is going to be going back to school in the fall. She's going to be getting her master's to pursue counseling. That's been really important in her life. It's a dream of hers. And so she said, the idea of going back to school, I feel this huge amount of pressure and weight to provide for us financially because of what you've chosen to do with your career. And I feel like, in a large way to this point, we've sacrificed a lot for you to pursue your dream, which is awesome. And I just want to know that we would be willing to do the same for my dream. And when she said that, my blood pressure rose and all of my insecurities flared because I felt like what had been, potentially on the line for me was my identity as a man, as a leader, as a provider, as a husband. And I thought a whole bunch of extremely irrational things. I thought about, are you kidding? Do you know how many amazing things we've got to be a part of in North Point and how many stories and how cool this is? And we should be so grateful. And I'm smart. I'm smart. I got a business degree from you. Come on. There's nothing what she talked about. That's a whole different world. But all these are going off in my head. But I just breathed for a little bit. And then I'm really grateful that I didn't respond immediately because I just thought about this message today, which is a little bit of an unfair advantage. But I thought about what I was going to be talking about. And it was like, if I am loved by God and nothing else, she did nothing to undermine my role as a husband, to undermine anything that has to do with my career, nothing in that moment. She was just real and honest with me. And in that moment, if I operate from this place, my identity, my core has not been shaken, I can be present with her in this moment. I can just listen, I can empathize, I can hear her concerns, and I can have a conversation about it and meet her in this moment. And for the first 10 minutes or so, it was a really cool conversation. I respected her boldness and her courage and her vulnerability to know, it might make you angry, but she's like, I just want to share my heart with you. For the next, 30 minutes, I operated from this place and all my identities and insecurities, and the next 30 minutes didn't go as great. Then we tried to finish over here for the last 10, and it went medium. So it was like a medium conversation. But in those moments, it is an absolute game changer. The conversation we were able to have there was amazing to think about. And how different would our relationships, our connections be if we found our identity in those places? You know what makes adulting hard? When you're tempted to chase. When you're tempted to chase and buy a car you can't afford, a house you can't afford, a career you don't need that's going to take you away from your family, chase a person that you should not chase. When you know where your identity already is, you know where your happiness and purpose and value is found, and you can save yourself so much regret on this side of the equation. You know what makes adulting hard? When you're stressed, anxious, or overwhelmed. Couldn't that be the definition of adulting? Couldn't we just say that? That is adulting right there. Emily and I talk about this too. We hate when this kind of a conversation is oversimplified, like the idea of anxiety or, just, hey, pray about it and I'll be good. She's going to go into counseling. She's like, it's way more complex than that. But when you think about a world without God, that should be a really stressful, anxiety-inducing world. Because not only are we not in control of anything, nobody's in control of anything. Everything is random. Nothing happens for a reason or a purpose. There's no silver lining. And even if it doesn't work out in this life, there's definitely no hope of anything better in the next life. The more our identity is found in Christ, the more that we know no matter what the circumstances are right now, I am loved by God and I already know how this ends and I know he'll be with me every step of the way, it changes things. What you do should not define who you are. What you do should be informed by who you are. So what if you radically defined yourself as loved by God? The way I want to end our time today is I really want you to think about this. I want you to think about that question of who are you? So I want to provide a space and a moment to do that. We're going to sing a song up here, and you can just sit and think and ponder. And if you're here and you're new to church maybe, you're new to this whole conversation, and it's bold for you just to show up today, I'm so grateful you're here with us. Maybe for you, a starting place is to think about, what you value. Just this is kind of, I want to be selfless, I want to be generous, I want to be these kinds of things. But another option that you may have to think about is maybe this leads to, I just have to be the best at absolute everything, and I just can't judge anybody else along the way. Or I'd love to invite you today to consider, could it be that you are loved beyond your wildest dreams by the creator of the universe? And as well, if you're in here and you are a follower of Christ, I'd like to extend the same invitation to you. What if our axis shifted a little bit over the course of our conversation today? We thought about all the things that we are tempted to define ourselves by, and what would it mean in this moment to listen to these words that we are children of God. God, I am who you say I am. Similar song, same song that we sang earlier today, kind of through a new lens. What would it look like to sit in and ponder that? So we're going to sing this together. We're going to listen to this song together, and then I'll be right back up.
Free at last, he has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Whom the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. I am chosen, not forsaken, 'cause I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not
not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am, whom the Son sets free. Oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
What you do matters, and who you do it with matters, but who you are informs all of that. So do you know how you'd answer the question of who are you? And could it be that you walk through these doors today more loved, more accepted, more valuable, with more purpose and strength than you had ever imagined previously? I'd love to pray for our time together as we head out today. Heavenly Father, God, thank you that you love us beyond our wildest dreams more than we could ever articulate or imagine. God, thank you that in your eyes we are enough, that we are forgiven, that we do have strength, that we do have purpose, not because of what we've done, but because of what Jesus has already done for us. God, we love you. Would you ping us? Would you remind us of that this week? When adulting gets hard again, would you just remind us that in every single one of those moments, God, you love us no matter what. And that's what we're rooted in. God, we need you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. You guys have an amazing week. Hope to see you next week as we celebrate Mother's Day together.